I'm Rabbi Danny Schiff from Pittsburgh. Who could have imagined when we began to plan this conference months ago that we would be coming together in a week when just last Shabbat a gunman would enter yet another synagogue on a Shabbat morning, on the last day of Pesach, and spread bullets around the sanctuary, targeting the individuals in that room for one reason and one reason alone, because they are Jewish. Who could imagine that we would be coming together on this day as mourners for Laurie Gilbert Kay, Zichrona Livracha, for those who were injured, and for all who were traumatized in that event, including Jews who were not there, but who surely were there in spirit. Who could have imagined that we would be here in the week that the New York Times, one of the most prominent newspapers in the world, would publish an anti-Semitic cartoon that would have made Goebbels proud? Who could have imagined that we would be here in the week that the American ADL, Anti-Defamation League, would publish its report on anti-Semitism in America in 2018 and would record 1,879 separate anti-Semitic incidents across America, the third highest on record? And who could imagine that all of that would happen exactly 6 months after Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh. Just to say the name of the city in a Jewish room today is to evoke one singular memory of that horrible morning on October the 27th, when 11 Jews lost their lives. I knew them all. 2 of my friends were injured. 4 Pittsburgh police officers injured as well. The worst anti-Semitic attack in the history of the United States. And every community represented here in this room from around the world stood by us, had vigils for us, supported us, and wept and mourned alongside us. It was a tragedy of historic proportions. And tragedy, of course, is the wrong word. I use it only because people tend to apply it, but we ought to call it what it was: a deliberate anti-Semitic attack. This was not simply another instance of American gun crime. It was a deliberate anti-Semitic attack. And you should note that the perpetrator, Yamach Shemo, cried out as he entered that synagogue, all Jews must die. He didn't mean to stop with the 11 he murdered there. He meant to go on to other synagogues that day, and had he succeeded, he would have come for you as well. All Jews must die. The perpetrator in California, last Shabbat. The Jews are ruining the world. Anti-Semitism lives. Anti-Semitism breathes and grows. There are those who say that anti-Semitism is on the rise, but perhaps it never really went away. Perhaps it's simply emerging, unashamed, back to the light, back somehow or other to being respectable. So the simplest narrative, the simplest story that people can tell about Pittsburgh is that it will go down in the long list of cities around the world where Jews were murdered just for being Jews. That Pittsburgh will forever evoke that terrible, bloody memory. But I want to say something very important to you this afternoon, and it's this. The story is not so simple. There's another feature, particularly of the American story, that we have to bear in mind in order to be honest about the situation in which we find ourselves. And it's that alongside the murderous act of this horrendous individual who took those lives in the pitiless way that he did, the citizens of Pittsburgh, the non-Jewish community of which we are a part, responded in extraordinary ways. The Muslim community of Pittsburgh raised $250,000, which they gave to our federation in the wake of the attack. What did they think they were raising money for? I'll tell you what they thought they were raising money for. They said explicitly, we want this money to go for the burial of Jews and for the repair of the synagogue. Muslims, the Muslim community. $250,000 to bury Jews and fix a synagogue. And they did more. The Shabbat after the attack, they offered to ring the synagogues of Pittsburgh with their bodies to protect their Jewish neighbors. I sat at the vigil next to a minister from the government of Israel when the leader of the Muslim community told us all at the rally about the money they were raising. And he couldn't believe that there were Muslims in the world who would respond to Jews in that way. On the Friday night after the attack, I was asked to speak at a synagogue far north of the city. Normally, that synagogue would have had 25 people at best on a Friday night. 750 people showed up, but only 250 of them were Jews. 450 Christians came along with 30 members of the clergy. The bima was too small to hold them all, as they all wanted to declare their solidarity with us, that they stood with us shoulder to shoulder in our hour of grief. The mayor of the city of Pittsburgh personally went to each of the 3 Jewish day schools in Pittsburgh and met with all the students and said to them explicitly, in this city, you, the Jewish community, will be made safe. You will not fear on your way to school or on your way home. And he proudly announced, on the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht, just 2 weeks after the attack, that the big difference between Europe and Pittsburgh was that in Europe, when the synagogues were attacked, the police and emergency services did nothing, looked the other way, didn't care. And in Pittsburgh, non-Jewish policemen ran into the building, putting their lives at risk to save Jews. We should forget none of this. The story is more complex than just rising anti-Semitism. And one more insight. My friend, the Orthodox Rabbi Daniel Wasserman, who heads the Chevra Kadisha in Pittsburgh, the Chevra Kadisha that was charged with cleaning up the scene, cleaning up the blood, collecting body parts, went to one of those very large hardware stores in order to buy supplies. In the parking lot, a man came up to him, recognizing he was Jewish because Rabbi Wasserman has a beard and a hat, and hugged him. I'm so sorry, I'm so sad for what happened. Thank you, Rabbi Wasserman said. Went about doing his shopping. At the checkout, Rabbi Wasserman has an odd collection of things in his cart. Cleaning gear, knee pads, lights to put on helmets. And the same man appeared behind him in the checkout line. What have you got all this stuff for? What's it for? Rabbi Wasserman explained to him what it was for, what he was going to do with it. Rabbi Wasserman went to pay, and the man said, I will pay. I will pay for all of what the rabbi is buying. No, no, said Rabbi Wasserman, we have donors. We have people who are giving us money that you don't have to pay. Then I will be your donor, the man said. I'm paying to clean up that synagogue. The story is not so simple. It is true. There is rising anti-Semitism. It is also true that, at least in America, there is a rising number of those who would embrace us and support us and hold us up when we feel like we are falling down. So I want to say 2 things to you. As you consider what you will compose in a statement about this very precarious moment in the history of anti-Semitism. Number 1, we have allies. The Jewish people is not a people that dwells alone. The Jewish people is not without friends. We should think how to use our friends, how to ask them to support us. If we are going to launch a battle against anti-Semitism, let us choose our allies and work together, not pretend that we are by ourselves. And the second thing is this, and the most important of all. The fondest dream of any anti-Semite who really means it, and they all do, is for a world without Jews. And if you can't get a world without Jews, then at least let the Jews stop being Jewish. Let them walk away from their Judaism. The best response that there can possibly be to anti-Semitism is to embrace our Judaism ever more fervently and deliberately and thoughtfully. To be more responsive and responsible Jews is the best way to frustrate an anti-Semite. And I don't care how you do that, because there are many paths to the embracing of Jewish life. But think of where you are right now and of what you could do to make your Judaism stronger, surer, prouder, in a way that will undermine the efforts of the anti-Semites. That would be the fondest wish of all those who died here and in the attacks in America and in every anti-Semitic attack in history. At the best you can do is to carry on their memory by being the finest Jews imaginable. May that be our path. Thank you.